Hello, and welcome to the ALN 2020 Asset Leadership Forum, Restructuring America. I'm Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited to be starting off today's event, Water and Wastewater. Two notes before we get underway. We have been getting interest in the ALN approach to asset leadership and asset management, so we want to make you aware, whoever's watching out there, the attendees, and also you panelists, we want to make you aware that there is a 2-week web course leading to ALN A55K professional certification starting on November 9th. See the ALN website for more information on that. That's assetleadership.net. And final note before we start, if you're watching out there and you want to comment or have a question for any of the panelists or on the material that's being discussed, we want to hear from you. So please use the chat function or the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. It shouldn't be a major issue. It's just a chat window on the right side of your screen and then a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'd love to hear from you. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Tacoma Zach, ALN Senior Fellow and President, Uberlytics.
Great, thank you. And good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I guess it depends on what time zone you're in. So this is great because we're able to do this pretty well across the country in one shot like this. So again, welcome to this particular forum. Our focus today is on the water sector. Excuse me. We have got a fabulous panel today of speakers and a discussion panel afterwards. And just before I introduce everybody, I was chatting with each of you, and after chatting with you, and some of you I know and for quite a while, and some of you are friends, and the kind of work that you've done, I know that we have some really, really important things to talk about today. We've got representation from federal, from statewide, and from actual consumer touch points. And I would love to give 90 minutes to everybody. And so, as was mentioned before, I think what we're going to do is try and find a way to do something like this on a quarterly basis. The agenda has yet to be set, but I think that would be a very worthwhile to be able to do a deeper dive into some of the things that we're going to chat about today. So as mentioned, my name is Tacoma Zach. I'm the CEO of and co-founder of Mentor APM, which is provides software solutions in asset management to the utility sector, as well as CEO of Uberlytics, which does risk and criticality analyses and fact finding for the water and utility sectors, and also a proud member of the ALN for a number of years. And as mentioned, we are also the chair for the water sector. Joining me today is a very distinguished and a lofty, rarefied air group of people. And I'm actually not kidding. They really, really have accomplished some extraordinary things in their careers. First, we'll be speaking will be David Collinsworth, who is the CEO and director of the Brazos River Water Authority. I hope I got that right, but I know your slides will correct me. And he's a lifer there and has come through the ranks and has pretty well touched, I think, almost every aspect of that operation. So it's an extremely deep understanding of what's going on there. And we're looking forward to hearing from a statewide perspective some of the challenges as well as the advantages of an asset management program. Following that will be Susan Iott, who is the deputy director at the GAO. I think you have a specified portfolio, but for right now it escapes me, and I apologize about that. But when Susan and I were chatting the other day, there are so many cool things the GAO is doing. And in fact, it's this unique line because they have this very, very delicate balance, because not only checking up on the government, but also checking up on other things as well. So I know there's going to be some very interesting commentary coming out of that, so representing federal initiatives. Following that will be David Totman, who is Director of Asset Management at Innovyze, former asset owner as well, like myself. And currently, and this is the part where I wanted to make sure I got it right. So I think the key thing right now is David, you are not only with the the American Association of Civil Engineers, but the representative from that group to the TC 251 committee, which is for the ISO technical committee. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, which is a long overdue connection between the American Society of Civil Engineers and the ALN, the Asset Leadership Network. So this is an exciting day for everybody associated with that. And then a good friend of mine, Robert Christian, who'll be joining us in the on the panel discussion, who is the executive director of the West Virginia Water Authority, delivering water to not only commercial customers, or I should say other cities, but also directly to the population. So there is a very, very close relationship between delivery of service and those of us who enjoy that extraordinary resource in this country of clean water. So without further stalling, I will now hand it over to David to take us off into the first session. So David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tacoma. I appreciate that. I'll set my timer here so I don't talk too long. Listening to who's on the panel and what we're going to talk about today. And Nick, you can go ahead and pull up slide 1 if you don't mind. It's clearly obvious to me that I am the least qualified person that will present today or sit on the panel to talk about asset management. But I think it's a good place to start and talking about from a water and wastewater utility and the challenges that we see coming down the road, the train that's coming, if you will, and how we're going to use asset management to help us accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. So I think this will be a good start, and then the folks that will follow my presentation will get you probably much more down into the weeds. So you can go to the next slide. I've been with the Brazos River Authority. I'll tell you a little bit about the organization. I'll tell you about our challenges, give you a tour of the basin, and then we'll talk about asset management. But I'd start here. About 20 to 25 years ago, we actually were on the cutting edge of asset management in Texas utilities. And I know that because our customers were oohing and eyeing over the things that we were showing them, the data that we were providing. We are a contract operator for wastewater plants throughout our area of jurisdiction, if you will. And the asset management to us then was creating a series of spreadsheets and tools that allowed us to track work orders. And we ended up using those to track warranty work, to track all the way down. It developed into you could manage your fleet vehicles. You could track your oil changes. So we really jumped into asset management then, thinking that that was a tool that we needed, and much like GIS and much like so many other tools that we use in the utility, we were very narrow-minded on how it would develop and what a very important tool that it would be for us in the future. I think it's important to tell you that because it's still amazing to me how many customers that I have that are somewhat sophisticated municipalities that still are light years behind so many of you and so many of the folks that are probably listening in the world of asset management. Municipalities that have millions of dollars worth of mechanical equipment that they're not tracking, that they're not monitoring, that they're not understanding their full risk portfolio from a utility perspective. So the industry has a long way to go. It's real encouraging to hear so many of you talk about the tools of the trade and where we're going, because it's smart money, and it's from a utility perspective something that's needed. So anyway, we'll get back into a little bit more of an asset management discussion here in a minute. You can see our mission there: develop, manage, protect the water resources of the Brazos Basin. It's a really unique watershed. It's roughly the same size as the state of Tennessee, 44,000 square miles. I am located there in the center, Waco, Texas. Some of our far-reaching to the west monitoring locations that we deal with are about 6 hours from Waco, and then it's about 6 hours for me to get to the headwater, to the confluence of the Brazos River to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a very large drainage area. A lot of people, tremendous amount of growth that's coming into what we call the Triangle of Texas, from Fort Worth to San Antonio, from San Antonio to Houston, and then back to Dallas. Tremendous amount of growth along our interstate corridors, which is providing a lot of challenges for both utilities and future water supply. We're a governmental entity. We're kind of like a state organization. We are created by the legislature. I report to 21 board members that are appointed by the governor of the state of Texas. So I have a tremendous amount of political interaction with what's going on. And we don't, what really makes us different than a state agency is we don't receive any tax revenues. The state of Texas permits its water, and they have given permitted to the Brazos River Authority an amount of water, and we are to manage that water, make it available, and then also do some treatment plants and water treatment. And then one of our biggest challenges is to develop new water supply. You can go to the next slide, Nick. So here's what, just to give you a spatial look at, here's what our water supply looks like. The dots in the red are reservoirs that we own, and I'll give you a real brief overview of each of those reservoirs. Possum Kingdom, Granbury, and Limestone, we own outright. So we own the parks, we own the dams, we own the gates, we own everything that comes along with ownership. The yellow dots are owned by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the majority of the water in those reservoirs is permitted to my organization, and we have agreements with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for storage of that water, and we actually pay for a certain amount of the O&M that goes into maintaining and operating those reservoirs. So we have a very vested interest in making sure that from the federal perspective that those reservoirs are receiving the funds that they need. If the gates aren't operable and we can't get water out, then our water supply is not as valuable to us. The majority of our water in these reservoirs, it's stored water, but it's released for downstream water users. So we have a lot of a high water use down along the coast from an industrial perspective. And then just to give you kind of a flare of who we provide water to, well over 100 different municipalities. Up near Lake Granbury, we provide water to a nuclear power plant. You'll see right in the center, we provide water to areas around Colleen, which includes Fort Hood, which is the largest Army military installation in the United States of America. And then down at the bottom, Marathon Oil, Dow Chemical, BASF, just a tremendous number of large industrial petrochemical companies that really provide a lot for the Texas economy and the United States as well. So you can go to the next slide, Nick. As I mentioned, we also operate wastewater treatment plants. We do not own any wastewater treatment plants. We operate mostly regional wastewater treatment plants under contract. And we use, for some of the cities that have not developed asset management, a lot of their assets get rolled into our programs and oversight. So it's a huge benefit to them. So we do a little bit of wastewater treatment plants. Next slide. We also operate water treatment plants. I mentioned where the growth was occurring in Texas. It is not occurring where the water is located. Water in Texas is, that's not spoken for, is really in 3 locations. It's in the Gulf of Mexico, but the problem with that is obviously high salts. And we're not thirsty enough to pay for salt removal and distribution of that water. It's in East Texas in reservoirs, which becomes a big political challenge in how you move water from one location to another, and then it's underground. And again, just the cost of pumping the water and moving the water to the interstate corridors between Dallas and San Antonio is significant. So we find ourselves in the business of moving water in large pipelines, and this is just an example of one of the pipelines that we own to move water from reservoir to reservoir. So that's a big challenge for us, and as we move forward, and a lot of our planning for future infrastructure, building large pipelines is going to be part of that. Next. So we also spend a lot of time doing water quality and environmental protection. I wanted to introduce this to you because it's one of those data points. It's a set of data that is collected, that needs to be managed, that needs to be made available to managers, sometimes at short notice. So from an asset management perspective, how you manage your data and deal with your data, it becomes a really big deal. So we spend a lot of time making sure that our water is of good quality, and we understand what trends are taking place in the river and in its tributaries. Next. one of the really fascinating things about rivers in Texas, most rivers throughout the United States, they start in areas of high rainfall, whether it be snow melt in mountains or more of a high rainfall type situations. In Texas, all of our rivers really start in very arid regions. So our reservoirs and the ability to capture that water and store it is critical for Texans and how we're going to grow and how we're going to supply water. So we also provide parks around our reservoirs. From a utility perspective, that's a really big thing, and becomes a high priority, especially during times of COVID when people start talking about closing down parks. So next. So let me give you a tour of the 3 dams that we own. This is Possum Kingdom Reservoir. It was built in 1941. It's probably, from a cybersecurity perspective, one of the most secure assets in the United States of America, because nothing on it at all is computerized. If you want to lower a gate, if you want to release water, you have to tether up and you have to go through a process of walking out where the concrete meets the metal gates and unlatch the gates. And you do that by filling that triangle under those gates with water. So what you're looking at is you're looking at 2 gates. Gate number 2 and 3 from the far right are releasing 9,000 cubic feet per second, and all the other gates are floated, if you will, so they're leaking water. If we have gates floated like that, that means a lot of rain's either coming or there's a lot of water in the river that's going to need to be released. These are just water supply reservoirs. So when they're full, we don't have any flood storage like the Corps of Engineers and so many other reservoir owners. So every drop of water in has to equal a drop of water out, and there's another data point that has to be managed. You can go to the next slide. Our second operation is a little bit more sophisticated, built in 1969, and these are just these are gates that these are Tainer gates that raise up and water flows under them, and these can be controlled from a computer system, a SCADA system in our office there. These reservoirs are designed to deal with probable maximum flood potential. So we have this many gates because this is on the main stem of the Brazos, and we may have to release up to 1 million cubic feet per second if we had the right rain event from Mother Nature. Next. The key takeaway from these slides, other than they're pretty slides, is I want you to see the dates. Our newest reservoir dates back to 1978. And behind these reservoirs, we're storing almost 1 million acre feet of water. I'm rounding that number up a little bit. But it's an overwhelming majority of the water that we make available to our customers. So the protection and the management, the long-term management of these pieces of infrastructure is absolutely critical. So you can go to the next slide. So here's really the challenges that I wanted to talk about. There's you heard me talk a minute ago about this train that's coming. There's this growth that hasn't slowed down for 20 years in the state of Texas. And in the 90s, when we were working with developers and working with municipalities, the numbers that we were seeing were laughable, and those numbers became true. The growth was unbelievable. The amount of growth that's happening on a daily basis is unbelievable. So it's put a tremendous demand for the development of new water. And then on top of that, we have all of this aging infrastructure that needs to be protected, and there needs to be plans in place for on both sides of my organization, how you're developing new water and how you're protecting the infrastructure that you have. I tell you all that because right now in the state of Texas, we sell the majority of the water that we sell as raw water, and we sell it for about $75 an acre foot. Our water is really, really cheap. And as we continue to meet these challenges that I'm talking about, I'm very candid with our customers. I'm very candid with our board of directors. Enjoying that cheap water is a thing of the past. And putting ourselves in a position to where we can justify what our future water rates are going to look like. Really what we have to have is this asset management strategy in place so that we can be transparent and we can explain and justify those cost increases and helping us understand what our future projects are going to look like. So, one of the first things that we did a few years ago was make the commitment that an asset management strategy, a risk management strategy through asset management was where this organization was going. And our commitment, I think the most important thing that we did was we committed staff to it. So it was our way of showing the entire organization that this is the way that we're going to go. So right now, while that group of BRA employees is becoming more educated on bringing our asset management up to what true asset management looks like, and what the softwares and what the strategies, what the culture, all of that's going to look like. We're also, the reservoir folks are analyzing what the long-term needs are on each one of those dams. And then from an operational perspective, we're analyzing and understanding the age of all of our pumps, all of our concrete, all of our infrastructure, so that once this asset management software, asset management tool becomes developed, then it really, from a financial perspective, becomes a way that we can look at and predict and manage what our future water rates are going to look like, what the future impacts are going to look like to our customers for the projects that we're going to do. I'll try to wrap up. I know I'm running out of time. From an asset management perspective, it's going to help us prioritize our projects. It will help us, as any of you that have been in the utility business, anytime you have a continuation of rate increases, you're held accountable for those rate increases like you should be. But it helps you justify those activities and really be transparent in showing the priorities and what those priorities are going to cost and how you create your rates. So from an asset management perspective, our organization is full steam ahead, and going to work with folks like the rest of the folks that are on the panel to really help us create and grow into that, so that we can optimize what we're doing. I have 2 bullets on here, and I need to explain them to you just real quick, and then I'll wrap up. Data overload and organizational acceptance. When we're talking about creating an asset management program, a risk management program here at the BRA, it has to be something that all levels of management and operations use. If we're collecting the data and we're asking the decision makers in the field, at the wastewater plants, at the dams, if we're demanding that they use that data, then we have to give them data, and we have to give them processes that make their job more efficient. And if we don't do that, then the organization won't buy into what we're doing, and we'll spend the next 10 years spinning our wheels and pulling our teeth out and pulling our hair out, trying to optimize what it is we're doing. So really our focus is certainly on the water treatment side and the wastewater treatment side. How do we create tools to allow our operators to optimize what they're doing and make their job easier? So Nick, that's it for my slides, and Tacoma, with that, I'll turn it back over to you all.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, David. And on your last couple of points there's a couple of things that I'm just resonating with. Is one, the extraordinary awareness of the need for focused tactical execution. Yeah. Asset management programs find their worth when the return on investment comes back. And if you can't make that connection to the tactical execution, it's not going to work. And I love the focus. The second thing I really like is the part that so many organizations seem to miss. And that is, they want to do the things, we want to make risk-based decisions. But the first thing you talked about was making a corporate commitment to this and dedicating resources to it, and a leadership commitment to that. And that is one of the 4 key principles of any asset management program. And if you don't have that one, it ain't going to go very far, even if it's a good program. So well done. Well done. Yeah, really cool. Thank you. There's I think we had a couple of quick questions just about the rates at the beginning, but I'm going to circle back to those questions at the end. Just in the interest of time, we'll probably be able to raise them a little bit up in the panel discussion, because I think that'll be applicable to across all the panelists. So I'm going to hand things over to Susan now. So again, Susan is the Deputy Director at the GAO, and it was actually a tough exercise to figure out what would be the set of topics that Susan could bring to the table today, because they were just all extremely interesting, and they all just touched on so many different points that are applicable. And that's why I think we need to do something like this again more quickly. So Susan, I'm going to hand it over to you, and the floor is yours.
thanks to Tacoma, and you can go ahead and words. You wondered what my portfolio was. It does include water quality and water infrastructure, which is why I'm here. And I do want to say to David, whenever I hear presentations from people managing water and wastewater infrastructure around the country, I think it's me who is the one who is the least qualified to be speaking on these panels, because I'm always amazed by the balancing and operations and everything that has to go on behind providing safe and clean drinking water and clean water for the country. So why and how does GAO, and who are we and how do we get involved in water and wastewater infrastructure and utilities? There have been several other people presenting at the ALN conference and have talked about GAO, but I'll just maybe say a few quick words about who we are and why I do the work that I do. We work at the request of Congress, and there are committees, I'm sure you're all aware, Transportation and Infrastructure and Energy and Commerce on the House side, Energy and Natural Resources on the Senate side, all of whom look at, provide funding for the various infrastructure sectors in the country through federal bills. The Water Resources Development Act is one of the ones that provides funding for the Corps of Engineers, and now lately, the last few times through to EPA for various programs. So we at GAO review these federal funds and programs. I am in a group that looks at EPA's funding, the state revolving fund programs, and funding for water and wastewater utilities. So I'm here to just talk a little bit about the work that we've done on asset management, why we did it, how we did it, and also I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the other areas of work that we've looked at in infrastructure, because I think, as David alluded to, asset management gets into your human resources, your data management, and all aspects of the business. So there are many different things that have to be considered in asset management. So go ahead and Nick, and let's go to the next slide. I'm going to take a 30,000 acre view as opposed to David's great view of all the operations on the ground. So GAO's done several reviews of what we call water finance. And when I talk about water finance, I mean the funding that water utilities use to pay for their long-term capital infrastructure, all the pipes and reservoirs and pumps, et cetera, that provide the water and treat the water that utilities provide to us. So as I mentioned, EPA has the two sources of funding: Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Program. I'll get to those a little bit more in a minute. USDA also provides a large source of funding for rural water utilities, and those are utilities that provide service to 10 cities or communities of 10,000 people and under. So we've reviewed programs related to those two agencies and three programs. We've reviewed those and their funding sources. I think here's a good place to mention the fact that the president's executive order on water, the provision of water that just came out last week, is relevant because it talks about coordinating all this federal funding and the federal programs and trying to make those more efficient. I think that will, we've looked at actually 8 programs overall. There are 8 agencies that provide funding in various different ways to water utilities. And we have looked at the fact that those programs are complicated with different requirements, different applications, different timing, and communities look at these and try to make sense out of them as they go about their business of trying to finance their infrastructure. So the coordination of that at the federal level can only help them get that more easily, we hope. So I thought I would mention that because it's timely for this conference. So Nick, we can move to the next slide. As I mentioned, the State Revolving Fund is the largest source of federal money for water and wastewater utilities. The dotted line is the one that I want you to look at here. It's the actual funding over time. It's been about $2 billion per year across the two funds. The peak that you see there is Recovery Act funding. when Congress provided $6 billion to the two funds. But you can see kind of the steady, consistent set of money that's coming. It goes to the states, and then the states loan it out to the utilities. We actually did an audit of this program, the two programs, the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds, to look at how sustainable these were over time. And EPA does have financial indicators that they use to look at the efficiency with which they provide this money. We recommended that they make sure that they include all sources of funding and have a better indicator to do that. In the last 2 years, EPA actually went ahead and has created those indicators. They're better financial indicators to monitor the provision of those funds to the states and then to the utilities to make sure they're being used in the best way possible to maximize the money available from the federal government to utilities to help them pay for infrastructure. Okay, next slide. That's all I'm going to say there on that. Let's switch to our asset management work. Over time, over the last quite a few years, GAO has been interested in asset management in different sectors. The people from my colleagues have talked about how we have used asset management for federal highway funds. We also have used asset management and looked at how asset management has been used by EPA and USDA in encouraging utilities to incorporate asset management principles as they provide them funding. So next slide, please, Nick. Actually, in the early 2000s, we did a large survey, a generalizable survey across large utilities and their use of asset management, and found that utilities were starting to adopt asset management as an approach. And at the time, about a quarter of utilities, the large utilities, were using assets. Since then, that was 2000. Since then, more have started to use it, as we've heard from David, and I think we'll hear from others. In 2015, we were interested in looking at how small utilities are providing and using asset management. We did that work because, as you all know, almost over 90% of utilities in the country are small, and they struggle and they have financial difficulties, and asset management could help them manage and plan for infrastructure replacement. So we were interested in how EPA and USDA, in providing funds to these small and rural, were incorporating the concept of asset management. So we found, looking at their programs, that they have in fact developed a framework for asset management that incorporates the 5 components that I have on the right of this slide, and that they were providing that to utilities through training. Now, not all utilities get that training. That's a different story, but it is available. And it is being provided to utilities, small utilities and rural utilities, through various training components. So I do want to just highlight the 5 components. I've got them kind of described briefly here, so I'll just explain a little bit more about them. But they include identifying the assets of the utility and the condition. If it's in poor condition, when it's been last replaced, if it needs to be replaced, that sort of condition description. It talks about identifying the desired service level and the critical assets needed to meet that service level, being clear about that and setting that as a goal. It talks about identifying the life cycle costs needed to replace all of that various different infrastructure and the assets. And then also it talks about identifying a long-term funding plan and how it is that utilities will replace all of those assets over time. Next slide, Nick, please. So we found that we talked to 25 utilities. So how we do our work is we come out and talk to a lot of you guys. We talk to people, to experts who are consulting with utilities. We talk to the utilities themselves and try to get the views of those people and trying to do their work And then we try to summarize and report on that back to the staff and the committee that have requested our work. So in our work on asset management, looking at small utilities and how EPA and USDA were helping them, we found that about half of the 25 small utilities we talked to had incorporated some of these 5 components in their management of their utilities and assets. More had identified their assets and the condition, then had developed a funding plan. And when we looked at the funding plans, they often incorporated setting aside reserves as opposed to having a full long-term plan for replacing infrastructure. We made some recommendations that EPA and USDA should identify cases and the lessons learned from those small utilities in trying to apply their framework and trying to use it at small utilities. We did that because small utilities face the challenge of having not necessarily having the people trained or available even to do the work of assessing their infrastructure or their condition or even identifying funding. So as you probably all well know, small utilities and rural utilities may have a half-time person or a part-time person managing their utilities. So this is a difficult thing for them to do. We thought identifying lessons learned and helping them see how things have been applied could be helpful. And EPA and USDA issued that, I think, a couple of years ago in 2018. We also recommended that EPA actually start to track the use of asset management by utilities, because if they're targeting training, if they're trying to get more utilities to use their framework and asset management, it would be helpful to know who is using it. And they have actually just this year indicated that they will start to work with states to track that information for both drinking water and wastewater utilities, small utilities. Next slide, Nick. So that's our asset management work. I thought I would just mention briefly some of the other work that we've done related to small rural utilities, again, because we've looked at things like workforce and resilience and things that reflect on or require asset management. So I've already said that rural utilities, we've defined those as those serving 10,000 and under. Small utilities are also 10,000 and under, but utilities of 25,000, maybe even 50,000 face similar kinds of constraints and capacity issues as they try to hire and conduct work in planning and financing. Next slide, Nick, please. One of our jobs recently, we looked at, we've looked at how small and rural utilities actually manage and replace and repair their infrastructure. I just wanted to briefly mention that we found that because of their capacity issues, the staff they have on hand and their technical capabilities, not that they're poorly trained, but they just may not have people with the technical capabilities to design and build projects. They rely on consultants to do that work. They also then rely on federal agencies to provide technical assistance in managing and running the utilities and their infrastructure, such as the circuit rider programs that I'm sure all of you have heard about. So USDA and EPA provide funding to the National Rural Utilities Association and the Rural Communities Association, Partnership Association. And they provide technical assistance at the state level to small utilities to actually manage and assess their assets and rebuild and finance that infrastructure. So next slide, Nick. We've also done a recent work looking at the utilities workforce and expected vacancies, which have been highlighted in various different industry reports, and how utilities can replace that workforce. So we looked at Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers and looked at water and wastewater operator numbers and how those will be replaced, how vacancies will happen, how growth of jobs will happen from 2014 to 2024. And what you see here, the thing to pay attention to, are the left side pie is for water operator jobs, and the right side pie is for all jobs. And the ratio of the pie slices is similar, so that the challenges of the overall workforce are similar to the water operator workforce. A portion of jobs will be coming from growth in the industry. A portion of the jobs will be coming from retirement and resignations and people leaving. And those are the jobs that need to be filled in the future. And so there is definitely growth and vacancies happening in the future. We then talk to utilities about how they plan to fill those, and if they were having difficulty filling those, and what they were doing about that. And we talked to 5 small and 5 large utilities. The thing that I want to focus on here is that the small and rural utilities we talked to identified a real challenge in finding operators. They were bringing on people that they were then training to be certified as operators in order to meet some of their needs. And so we then looked at how federal agencies were helping to identify and train people to fill these jobs. And EPA has worked with labor and Veterans Administration and other agencies to try to provide training opportunities to fill these jobs, to help fill these jobs. And we did find that the apprenticeship by the National Rural Water Association is a key area that might identify a key program that could help identify and fill jobs in rural areas and small communities. One last, go ahead, Nick, one last slide. I just want to highlight, we have looked at how water utilities are building resilience for climate change and extreme weather. And again, we interviewed a 15 utilities, I believe, water and wastewater utilities, and we identified efforts that they had to plan for resilience for their infrastructure. In other words, lifting it out of floodplains or protecting it from flooding in various ways, or relocating if necessary. The picture here shows Iowa City, the wastewater treatment plant flooded and then actually being relocated. And they used federal emergency management funds to help move that wastewater treatment plant. So federal funds, federal agencies do fund water and wastewater infrastructure, and we identified the need through interviewing experts in the utilities to say that funding should be targeted to opportunities to make the infrastructure more resilient rather than just building it back in a potentially vulnerable way. So I think that I probably am close to my time, so I will stop there. Next slide, Nick. I did list the reports that I just summarized very quickly. And the next slide, I provided my contact information if anybody does want to get in touch. And I'm happy to answer any questions and go into more detail. I know that was a very fast overview of our work. And thank you very much again for the opportunity to present it. I'm excited that we're able to talk about how the federal government can encourage and facilitate asset management for water and wastewater utilities.
Thanks, Susan. And once again, and I'll share this was that I was a circuit rider at one point doing the EPA 104G program here in the state of Arizona, and I can attest to the sore need for a deeper bench strength with the small utilities. They struggle, they try, and it's through no fault of their own. And it's exciting to see that there is an opportunity for the federal programs to come into play on something like this. And there are a number of questions, and we're going to bring those over to the panel discussion. Some of them have to do with funding, some of them have to do with the programs, that sort of thing. So we'll bring those in then. So I'm going to kick things over now to David Totman, also a friend of mine, and with a varied, interesting career, also having worked here in Arizona as a regulator and a former asset owner as well. So David, I know you've got some interesting things to say. And in fact, I also want to say, Susan, thank you for bringing up the executive order, because I think the fact that it proves that the ALN, we are up to date And and I know that David, you had some thoughts on that as well, and some of the discussions we've had about what's going on in some of the other states. So I'm eager to hear your presentation.
All right. Yeah, thanks. As soon as the presentation pops up here. All right. Yeah, you can kind of hopefully. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So thanks everyone. I'm excited to be here. You know, David Collinsworth's presentation resonated with me quite deeply. Tacoma said I was an asset owner at one point in time. I was the asset manager at Colorado Springs Utilities, and we had an extensive raw water delivery system right there in Pikes Peak. And I've got huge respect for those organizations that manage both natural and built assets, especially when you get into water and you bring in the whole conversation of water rights when you're looking at your various asset projects. So again, excellent presentation by David. And yeah, Susan, the federal perspective, I second Tacoma's comment about small utilities and just the dire need for support out there. So I applaud the efforts of the GAO. My talk, so yes, I'm David Totman. I'm the Vice President of Asset Management at Innovyze. We're probably one of the world's largest hydraulic modeling companies when it comes to supporting water and wastewater. But I'm actually changing hats, and I'm here to really talk about the American Society of Civil Engineers. I was the 2019 president of the Utility Engineering Surveying Institute. We were one of the newest institutes. We're really an amalgam of the pipelines division, quite a large division of ASCE, and also the surveying geomatics division, which was one of the longest running divisions at ASCE. I don't have slides on ASCE. I think most folks know the American Society of Civil Engineers. At least I hope so. You'll see some slides on some of our products and services, if you will. We're one of the largest civil engineering bodies in the world. We do have global representation, so that's kind of a proud thing to be part of. And as Tacoma kind of mentioned, I am the ASCE representative to the U.S. Technical Advisory Group on ISO Technical Committee 251, which is responsible for the ISO 55000 standard on asset management. So Nick, next slide. How I want to kind of put in context, why ASCE is now heavily involved in asset management, and the division I just mentioned, the Institute, the Utility Engineering Surveying Institute, we have our own asset management division, and we are really focused on infrastructure life cycle and getting civil engineers to think about asset management. And I'll get to our report card. I think you've all heard about the ASCE report card on America's infrastructure. But the Grand Challenge is an initiative that's been around for quite some time. And next slide, Nick. The mission statement, if you will, about the Grand Challenge was, the report card identifies these gaps, but the Grand Challenge was goal was to reduce the life cycle cost of infrastructure by 50% by 2025, which, if you look at your watch, is right around the corner, and foster the optimization of infrastructure investments for society. Kind of a noble purpose. It if you look at some of the key words there, it just screams out asset management. So I guess one of my thoughts, Nick, next slide. We could have made this a little easier if we just said do asset management. I don't know if that would have been easier to understand or not, but as civil engineers, we have to expand the text a bit and say a whole lot of words, and it really boils down to doing asset management. Next slide, Nick. And so, like I say, you may be very familiar with our infrastructure report card. We've been doing this for many years, and the latest report card was in 2017. Specifically in the water wastewater industries, our grades are not too great. I had a professor that made a comment about that they don't give Fs. If you got a D, you're still in pretty bad shape, because Fs were just too much paperwork, so they'd give you a D. Anyway, and so the D says we have lots of room for improvement. Now, the 2021 report card will be coming out, so please stay tuned for that. I won't spill the beans on what we look at in 2021, but again, this report card has been used quite a bit to kind of get the conversation going, and indeed about asset management, but definitely the kind of the dire state that our infrastructure is in across the board. Next. And so with that report card, there was a series of reports called the Failure to Act reports, and these took a look at major industries, infrastructure industries, if you will, and we would call them asset classes, right? There was a report on the energy industry, a report on transportation, a report on water and wastewater, and really kind of one of the capstone reports was this economic report that took a look at kind of almost the exponential effects if any one of those two industries should fail together. You start to see these exponential economic impacts, and of course, that's where the GAO is definitely coming in and taking a look at that sort of economic impact, anywhere from the infrastructure itself to funding mechanisms to the workforce. And so these failure to act reports really kind of highlighted the impact of what if we just kind of ignore these needs. Next slide. And so this is actually one of my favorite diagrams, if you will, from the grand challenge. Is we know we have soaring infrastructure needs, is the top arrow showing dollars over time, and we only have a limited available funding, right? It's just barely rising. It's almost flat. And so clearly we have a problem. There's a gap that we need to address. And so the grand challenge is really taking a look at, well, how can we take a look at new funding sources, and we're starting to see some of that conversation, and glad to have GAO in the conversation there. But really we're looking at through policy actions, from technology enhancements, to be able to kind of bring down those infrastructure needs. If anything, not the need so much itself, but the cost, right? Being much more creative in our approach to bring those costs
program up. It takes time to pull enough data together to know where your priorities really are. Is the data good enough? And so then when you put the call it the corrective action or the solutions in place to address those risks and priorities, it takes time. And hopefully there's enough patience going on there. You can't execute, and it's not like you flip a switch and all of a sudden you're there. So right. Susan, you were talking a lot about the small utilities, and I like I said, having done some of that stuff here in Arizona, it's your heart goes out to them, because Herculean efforts, and try as they might, sometimes they're just not equipped, and the tool set isn't there, and the bench depth isn't there. What are some of the biggest challenges for getting asset management programs, or at least the awareness and some of the work you guys were talking about, getting those implemented, or getting those to to take root at the local level on the small, particularly at the small utilities?
Thanks, Tacoma. Yeah, I started to talk about those and only hit a couple or one. The main one being human resources and their time. They're focused on managing the utility and may or may not have time to put together these plans. And so they're looking to others to help them, and or to find that the people to help them do that. Even slightly larger utilities may have that challenge. Large utilities can have people to do it, but they also face the challenge of people agreeing that this planning needs to be done, as opposed to maintaining resources or going out and doing the work. I think one of the other things I would highlight, costs, of course, the cost to plan versus putting money in the ground. And then finding the funding sources for it. Small utilities in particular have a harder time getting funding. Even though there are other federal programs with the available funding, sometimes small utilities have a hard time qualifying for it, and they don't have access to the bond markets like the larger utilities do. So they often need grants because they don't want to raise their rates. So that's a big challenge. And then that leads me to maybe the most important challenge is political support. Often the rates are determined by mayors and city councils, and they don't want to raise rates, or they don't raise rates enough to pay for all of this. And so one of the benefits of the asset management program is I think as Bob was kind of alluding, you have a plan in front of you that says we need to do these things in order to provide you this water, and it's
Right.
going to cost us this much. And people can often support that, and they will maybe more willing to. So that's one of the big benefits of then trying to get the political support and understanding for the necessary rate change that sometimes follows.
Yeah. Well, and dealing with small utilities, which we've done a lot of in the past, if you have and I'm just picking some numbers here because they can be somewhat typical, but if you're looking at a 10% margin on your cost versus your revenue, and to be able to sustain some things, and if it's a municipal, at least you got to break even. 10% for an agency that has a $400 million budget, that's a good chunk of money. You can do some good engineering with that and some good stuff. But when your budget is, barely cresting $60,000 for the year, and there are some small agencies in Arizona that are doing that, try to come up with $6,000. They can't. So then the follow-on question is what kind of assistance programs would there be available for someone to be able to say we need to do asset management because we have to look at, protect our long-term infrastructure, small as it might be, but these are the people that are counting on us. So what kind of programs are available that maybe either come from the federal side of things?
So the same programs I was mentioning, the state revolving fund programs and USDA have set aside certain portions of that money to help pay for asset management plans. They're recognizing the benefit of it and the need to pay for it. Certain states have started to at least require asset management plans as part of infrastructure development. And so they may provide funding for that. But I know USDA and EPA both set aside a small portion of their programs to pay for asset management plans. There's a lot of competition for it. There's a lot of need out there. So there are various legislative efforts to provide more funding, but that's in the works.
Yeah. So is there a threshold size that you got a better shot if you're a half MGD plant versus a 5 MGD plant, or is it if you're getting something to the size that David Collinsworth is running, well, I'm sure you have, like you said, you've got other financing options, but is there a size threshold above which or below which you haven't got a hope and a prayer?
Depends on the states, because the states are the ones that are driving the funding sources. They get the money from EPA. USDA drives their funding from headquarters through their state offices as well. But EPA's funds go through the states, and the states decide where they're going to prioritize their funding. And so looking at the state program that manages the revolving funds and their criteria, that's where the decisions are made. Yeah. And I'm not sure I've seen a trend as we look at the various state revolving fund programs. There are some, like New Mexico has focused because they have so many small utilities. They have focused some funding on small utilities, and maybe Montana and some of the other states have as well.
So Tacoma, real quickly, the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018 through the EPA for potable drinking water only, they really targeted all water systems, community water systems supporting 3,300 population and greater, need to have this risk assessment, basically an asset management plan. So they kind of put the requirement out for them to enhance their emergency response plans, but also do these risk assessments. But of course, no funding provided. So, but that was their threshold was that 3,300 population and above for drinking water systems.
Was it risk or resiliency?
Yes. Right. So they
we all
wanted.
know they are two different things. So
Well, yeah, they wanted you. The law basically says that you're going to do a risk assessment, right? So look at condition, look at criticality. Good old fashioned asset management principles in understanding your infrastructure, as well as do you have a funding vehicle to
right.
fund those projects. That then actually fed into your ERP. Almost every utility has an emergency response plan, and they wanted your infrastructure risks to kind of go into your good old classic kind of natural disaster ERP. So again, it was targeted on 3,300 and above.
Let's follow this thread on funding a little bit and bring that over to the two asset owners that we've got here. So as David and Robert, sorry, Bob, called you Robert because you showed up as Robert on the on the Zoom name there. So what are the funding sources you guys are able to leverage, and did you have challenges?
David, do you want to go first?
I was going to be a gentleman and let you do that, but it's something that we've just decided that we're going to roll into our rate for raw water. And when we put proposals forward for municipalities to operate their wastewater treatment plants, it's just a part of what we do. So we haven't, but again, I also bragged earlier that our rates are really cheap. Our rates are really low. So, there'll be growing pains and there'll be times of reckoning when we start reaching that price point of making of our customers questioning what's in our rates. There'll be times that we'll have to justify what's in there and why we're doing it. From the perspective of working with a municipality, I think we're already sophisticated enough that we can show them that let's talk about a wastewater lift station. If we're tracking the life and the use of a wastewater lift station pump in our maintenance, then we can make, with the data that we have, a very educated decision whether it's time to replace a pump or to continue to work and repair the pump. So there becomes a bang for your buck right there. It's as we begin to progress on to things that are more difficult to show, more just the prioritization of projects, of large capital projects versus the immediate bang for your buck, that it's going to be more of a challenge.
So we have at least 10% of our revenue that goes into our capital funding. Any large projects historically have been bond financed, and of course debt service also included in our revenue. Lately, I'd say over the last 3 or 4 years, we have really launched an alternative finance program. We've been chasing a lot of grants. We've been pretty successful at the state level. We have received a couple Army Corps Section 219 grants. So I'm very excited to see Susan's presentation on the link between asset management and alternative financing. So I really do hope that grows and progresses, and that we're right there to take advantage, if you will. But that's pretty much where we're at. We chase alternative financing to help finance the larger projects and keep our rates down and our issuing of debt.
And I will say, from having seen some of that go on, you've got the magic touch.
We've been very fortunate. Yes.
So yeah, because funding is there's a lot of cool things one wants to do, and funding is always a big challenge in these things. And I know from a corporate perspective, what we used to do is, because we were basically in a for-profit situation, we just looked at it as it's part of the cost of us doing business because of our obligations that we had as far as asset condition on hand over 20 years from now. So these long-term plays. So, when we cleared the decks back in early 2000, we basically said, look, we've got these assets that are going to have to last 20 years, and we got to give them back in as good or equal shape. How are we going to do this? And, you scour the world for all the best stuff, and you sort of clear the decks. And you go, well, you know what? There's some really sharp tools out there that help us manage the more complicated and significant systems in play. like RCM, and there's a whole bunch of other kinds of tools that are very effective. But the notion of putting together a management program that's specifically focused on assets overall and aligning the organization internally, it was just basically what we looked at as a cost of doing business. And that return on investment really, we realized was going to come a few years out. But when you're looking at a 20-year horizon, it made a lot of sense, Some of the challenge with the short-term contract operations or the short-term view is if you're looking for return on investment within a year or two, it's not going to happen because it just takes longer to, but if you put it in play, I mean, we need to be thinking much longer horizons and time horizons and thinking for our children, because they're not going to be able to afford to replace the entire infrastructure on their own. It would just be, it's not possible. There's a question that popped through, David, to kick it back to you for a second. You mentioned the notion of managing risk as the focus when budgets are tight. I'm reading you the question now, which is often the case. Isn't maximizing the value of the portfolio as important as managing risk in these times?
Yeah, great question. And I'd love to punt to my colleagues, Bob and David.
I was really glad you stepped up and answered that one. Well done. I'll mute.
And I'll speak, again, former asset owner, and actually, my alma mater there, Colorado Springs Utilities, we're a municipally owned utility, right? So the citizens, the ratepayers owned the utility. And so that's an interesting thing, right? Portfolio value. That was one of the things when we found asset management, understanding our infrastructure value, we'd always run on book value, and we had to quickly start looking at replacement value. And we were for service. So I had electric, gas, water, and wastewater, generation, treatment, distribution, transmission, collection, all of that. And being a municipally owned utility, though, we were nonprofit, right, and not for profit. And so value, it was just an interesting topic, right? We didn't talk about value of the system because everyone owned it. It was the value to the citizens and the ratepayers. And so, a portfolio value was kind of a foreign concept, and Susan can probably speak to this, but as a governmental municipal entity, we weren't for profit. Heck, we weren't even allowed to build cash reserves for our capital projects. It was we had our O&M and we had our capital, and never should the two mix, and so our capital was predominantly municipal bonds, right? And so we were always worried about our credit rating and customer satisfaction, and our portfolio had to be worthy of the bond rating that we had, but it's I would think the American waters, the Golden State waters, of the country can attest to portfolio value, right? But again, in a municipal, we understood and we knew we had to change our concept from book value to kind of replacement value, just because of different costs, and especially as we were getting aging infrastructure and we were doing upsizing, especially some of the downtown redevelopment. The contractors and the various land developers understood depreciating assets and would say, well, these assets were already depreciated, we're only going to pay you so much to upsize, right? And so we definitely wanted to go from book to replacement value. But having a maximizing asset portfolio value, it was actually more important in our energy side because of the deregulation of energy. But in the water, wastewater, we just kind of sat there dumb, fat, and happy, and it was just, we knew we weren't going to be ever deregulated, so to speak. Now, and those times are changing, definitely changing these in the current environment. But for us, it was, giving the ratepayer the biggest bang for the buck. And to us, that just meant, every dollar you give to us, we're going to spend it wisely on mitigating risk. And I think I would be interested in Susan's response to the portfolio concept, value of portfolios.
Yeah, thank you, David. That is an interesting relationship to some work we're currently doing, looking at private water utilities and the fact that they do focus on value, and different states actually are treating value and focusing on value, book value versus fair market value in acquisition of utilities, and the effect that it has on rates. That's been something that we've been struck by, and the fact that the difference in those rates, the depreciated value of and real value of the utility versus the fair market value and what you can acquire it as has a large impact on eventual rates. And so that notion of difference of value related to that asset and to the service provided is very different for private utilities versus the public utilities, as you pointed out very well. But then I think that the focus from the asset management perspective and replacement value is the one that we want people to have. What will it take to replace these assets over time? And are we considering that in the overall financing structure so that we are capturing and replacing that value at least, I think is what we want. I say we, meaning people who are managing utilities, including the federal government and investment in those utilities. We want to reflect the replacement value and maybe not necessarily the fair market value. That's a different value. So valuation is different. And I agree with you. The municipals have a different perspective.
I mean,
not necessarily wrong.
Yeah, and David probably has, you know, with Brazos, I mean, we saw like a 3-to-1 ratio, right? Our replacement value was 3 times our book value, because our book value is, you know, we started as an electric company back in the 1800s in Colorado Springs. And so our book values were non-existent. And so replacement value was key to making sure our customers understood what they owned.
Yeah, we built a dam in 1929 for $17 million.
Yeah.
You know, replacement value now is well in the billions. So that's
Somebody's
really,
house cost that.
yeah. So really, you know, how do we prolong what we have and replacement costs are what we're focused on.
Exactly.
Bob, did you want to add anything to that? I know I've got something I want to just chime in on, but Bob, you got anything?
No, I think that's very well covered. Yes, thank you.
You know, I really appreciate you guys brought a perspective on it that I hadn't even been thinking about, and that is replacement value versus book value. And so from an economic perspective, of course, that's definitely something that's on the side of the maximum value, you know, as far as asset management is concerned, to focus maximizing the value for the assets. But at the risk of being a reductionist, I'll say that there is an overlap between managing risk and maximum value. If you think of a Venn diagram, but they have their own areas that are exclusive to the other side. And anybody who's managed people, I think, will understand this if you've managed facilities. So if you're looking at maximum value, yeah, you want to do the right thing to the assets at the right time to not overmanage them and not underfund them, so that you are actually extending the life as appropriate, not to the end point. Beyond where it's financially viable. But as far as risk is concerned, there's a whole world that the finances don't touch. And that is, do the employees go back home safely every night? Because if you have systems and assets in play, and those pose a risk to the employees, or they pose a risk to the environment, or pose a risk to regulatory issues, this is all part of the envelope that, you know, you do an initial risk and criticality examination on first in the first place. And while there is overlap in the areas that we discussed about risk versus value, there's this other world of, well, the values that an organization holds, that they espouse to, that are part of their stakeholders' requirements. It should be that the employees go home safe every night. We saw that particularly in the refining industry. I don't know, that's outside this particular sector, but there's a particular emphasis there, a very sharp emphasis on safety and process and procedure. And so when you're looking at that, even within the municipal context or private utilities operations, they are related in some areas, but I would venture to say, in fact, I'd stake a lot on it, there are some unique elements that reside in either camp and don't cross over so easily. So you guys definitely brought to bear the idea of replacement value over. I hadn't even thought of that in this context. So it looks like Nick is back up, and it looks like we're basically running out of time here. I want to thank each and every one of you for participating. It has been, I know we could probably keep on going for for a lot longer than this. So thank you again for very informative talks, engaging as well. I was very happy to hear that, and also for this panel discussion for contributing to this body of knowledge. And I really look forward to doing this again, at least on a quarterly basis.
Hey, Tacoma, and I don't mean to cut anyone off here. I just want to quick flash our organizational member slide just to say, you know, that this would not be possible without these organizations. They're really great in supporting the Asset Leadership Network and everything that we do, like this event. And then I would just echo what Tacoma has said. Thank you all for being here, for those who participated in the discussion and those who watched online and those who will watch later. And if you speakers have some time, we could certainly just carry on. Otherwise, feel free to say some closing salutations and sign off if you need to.
Yeah, I'll stay on, and if anybody needs to go for it. But there are a couple other questions I think that are worthwhile, posting up.
Okay,
Thanks
I've got to
so much,
step
everyone.
off, folks.
Yeah.
Thank you
David,
very
thank
much.
you very
I
much.
appreciate meeting
Thank
you
you,
all,
David.
and great discussion. Well done.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks, Bob.
you, David.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. I'll touch base with you later.
Sounds good.
David, thank you for staying, and Susan as well. Hopefully you can stay for maybe just a few more minutes. One of the questions that popped through, which I actually thought was kind of interesting, is who reviews an asset management plan to see that if it's actually worthwhile, rather than just a paper exercise? And a very valid question.
And I was just trying to type an answer to it as we were ending. So I'll start, because I thought it was a good question too. If it's prepared as part of a funding package for a federal loan and or grant or loan from federal monies, the state office can look at it and review it, that the state office that it's submitted to. The federal agencies, in the case of USDA, they review different loan packages, and so they could review it. And that just goes if it's for part of a package for a federal funding. So I'm assuming that in other cases, asset management plans, that when I've talked to utilities, I think that they can be benchmarked. You could share that, or others could look at it. You can make sure you're meeting certain kind of benchmarks, and your management would review it for those benchmarks. But David, you probably have a much better sense of that.
Well, my answer is a bit, potentially self-serving in that as a technology provider, we work on, in essence, digital asset management plans, right? And so who reviews it is pretty much everyone involved, and are the answers that are coming out of the end of, print report, are they even sensical, and am I going to make these multi-million-dollar decisions off of them? And so, it's interesting when you codify business processes into a technological solution, you immediately pick up all sorts of eyes, right? It's not just a paper document on a shelf. You can actually interact with the digital version. And so it becomes very quickly apparent that the asset management plan is worthless, or it's actually generating some useful information, right? And so
yeah,
that's our goal, is to kind of have these codified business solutions that you can I call it lots of times the phoropter test. And you've all been exposed to a phoropter. You may not know what it was, but when you go to the eye doctor, that little device that they ask you better one, better two, and they get your eyes tested. That's the sort of approach we take, right? Is you put in your kind of your decision trees, if you will, your Boolean logic into everything. You're making decisions on risk and costs and all these things. And you're better one, better two. And then you get an answer and you're like, that doesn't really make sense. So tweak it to better three, better four. Now you start building clarity, and you're realizing you're having to ask yourself some internal questions, basic asset management principles, and you start to fine tune that over time. So, there's and the rest of the world is so far advanced in terms of asset management plans, but even they sit on the shelf. And so it's I think this new digital era gives us a chance to really kind of take a look at these almost real-time amps and see if they even make sense, right? So you kind of have that quick, you have a very quick iteration of making sure that you are building something sensible.
right. Yeah, I think, and I probably do need to put a plug in for the ALN on this one, but also self-servingly, I mean, we've done a number of asset management plans and reviews for others, and I'm always struck with how complicated people can make them versus how simple they can make them. It
Yes.
depends who's helped them. There is a thriving business in obfuscation, and And I would even say, so like, how much concrete can I sell? So, and I think simplicity and straightforward is probably the best. And, if you look at either the standard itself or the Asset Leadership Network has an ISO 55000 training program available. And there's a number of folks associated with the ISO 55000, or I should say the ALN, that can lend a hand and do a quick review from if they're not going for funding or whatever. But David, I think you also hit the nail on the head. Look at somebody else's, but we always have to remember they're in a different context. And when you read somebody else's stuff, you realize, oh, okay, that maybe works for them, or maybe you don't like the style of writing. But you can take the points away that that it just has to have a few essential things, and you can keep it simple. And I always say take baby steps and start with something. And if it starts making good common sense, and it starts sharpening the focus on where you need to pay attention, and it starts bringing some return on investment, okay, notch it up, take it up another notch. If at the end of the day your goal is certification, that's a little bit of a bigger apple to take a bite out of.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting is, and Tacoma, you and I have talked about this. I think it's an important point to bring up in this forum is, so many organizations, they're like, okay, we're going to do asset management. So the first thing we need to do is inspect and assess the condition of every asset we have, and for the next 18 years, we're going to do that. And then we can start working on criticality, right?
Yes.
and so backwards, right? And when you look at criticality first and what are your critical assets, those are the ones you better understand condition first. And that is a challenge.
Oh, David, so close to my heart. I'm so glad you said that, but I didn't want to say that early on. Well, the amount of money we save by flipping the order and finding critical areas of criticality first and then expending condition money saved buckets and bucket loads of money. And it's a way more efficient process.
Yeah.
And that's what they advise.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just, it was like music to my ears.
And I'm cutting you off further and saying that's what they advise small and rural utilities to do, is just focus on those because they can't afford to do all the process that you're talking about, David.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just kind of common sense, when you just how you run your own household, right? You're gonna spend the money on the stuff you can't live without. So.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I think the household example I always look at is like most of us have cars. And if we managed our cars the way public infrastructure is managed, I'm not sure we'd be able to get back and forth to work very well. Right. There'd be a lot of jalopies on the road. But I mean, it's relatively straightforward. We intuitively know, we got to deal with the tires or we're not going anywhere. And you have to look after the oil in the engine or it's not going to go anyplace. And then, the entertainment system, while it's sure nice to have, you can probably get to and from work and to the grocery store without the entertainment system or even the radio. So, there's an automatic prioritization that goes on there. And if you just expand that a little bit, look a little bit deeper within the utilities, you're going to find some of those answers. I always say though, too, is if you start off with understanding, why do you exist? What is the reason why the agency, the organization, the treatment plant, why does that infrastructure, why does it even exist? What's that level of service that it's supposed to be providing? And then making sure, and it was a great session a number of days ago on the stakeholders and the disparity sometimes between level of service depending on the socioeconomic or cultural background one resides within. These public infrastructure assets, they're designed for everybody's use of equal measure. And so looking at the system, figuring out what you're supposed to be, why are you there? It's a free exercise that you can carry on internally. Yeah, you got to pay for staff to show up, but it's basically, it doesn't cost you anything to figure out exactly, very cleanly, very crisply, why do you exist? From that, so much flows in terms of them being able to prioritize. Oh, okay, you know what? We maybe we shouldn't worry about the color of something. Maybe we better worry about the condition of the pipe, rather than its color.
Well, and that's the conversation I have with at ASCE. Is getting engineers to understand. So many civils will, I'll talk about asset management. They're like, oh, that's we don't do asset management, and it's like, well, of course you do. And especially very specifically when you get into like hydraulic modeling, Everyone talks about having an all pipes model, right? That's the holy grail of hydraulic modeling, is to model, every single pipe in the system. But they do what they call skeletonizing, right? They will model the transmission mains, the major pipes, And so I'll tell them, I said, oh, well, you're doing asset management. They're like, oh, no, we're not. We're doing hydraulic modeling. Well, what pipes have you modeled? Well, the important ones. The critical ones. Yeah. Well, that's the foundation of asset management. And they're like, wait a minute, you tricked us. It's like, well, no. The asset management plan is just like your hydraulic modeling. You focus on the core infrastructure that is the backbone, the foundation, the skeleton, to the system. And so we just have to expand the vocabulary is what we're.
Yeah, and it's interesting, what is asset management? It's the coordinated activity, that's a really, an important thing. A lot of asset management is already done. It's perhaps just a little bit uncoordinated. I'm not using the word in a pejorative sense, but just in a factual way. That it's like, it's just not coordinated very well. And there's a lot of things that they instinctually do. Sometimes the order makes a difference to save money, but and then a few other things to bring into it. And even in very rudimentary basic steps, asset management, and we've been on this bandwagon for a number of years now. It is not some enigma that you've wrapped in a puzzle or whatever that phrase was. It is actually rather accessible and easy to do, as long as you just put it in some bite-sized pieces and think about it a little bit logically, and away you go. You do have to have a couple of controlling documents to keep you on the straight and narrow, to make sure that people know what they're supposed to be working on. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's accessible. It is not the elephant in the room that's going to run you over. I think we've exhausted the questions. There were some other ones that are more best dealt with on a one-on-one basis. Anyways, thank you guys again for staying a little bit extra over time. Thank you to everybody who's been watching, and those of you who've hung on for the rest of this. Appreciate it, and we look forward to doing this thing again someday. So, all right, thanks guys. Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
I know it's a few days away, but still.
It's always good to look for a weekend.
Yes, it is. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.